beauty, style, and influencer culture. My name is Sarah Conley, and I'm a freelance writer, activist, and style blogger. So this week, Fashion Week actually does kick off on Sunday, and it is obviously a highly contested event given the pandemic. We'll get to that a little later in the show, but I wanted to kick off talking about designer collaborations for the Biden-Harris campaign. You may have seen via their email list that a group of designers actually designed merch for the Biden-Harris campaign. This isn't the first time this has happened. Hillary also had a similar collection come out. You might recognize some of the big names as Jack and Lazara from Forenza Schuler, The Coon, Vera Wang, Prabal Gurung, Tory Burch, just to name a few. There are several more. There are items like t-shirts and sweatshirts, scarves, necklaces, and of course, face masks. And if you are interested in bucket hats, there's even one of those for you too. So continuing on to the next trending story, a L'Oreal UK executive is sounding the alarm that makeup sales might have slumped to the point that they will never recover. So if you're not familiar with the beauty industry, there's a concept called the lipstick index, which essentially is kind of like a canary in the coal mine for the recession. So the idea is that if lipstick sales go up, we're entering a recession because lipstick is sort of an inexpensive way to make yourself feel better, especially when you are trying to keep the budget tight. So this L'Oreal executive is actually saying that consumer tastes may have changed permanently because of masks, because of us no longer leaving our house. Hey, Mayra, thank you so much for tuning in. It's so nice to see you here. So L'Oreal is the largest beauty retailer in the world. So for an executive from their team to actually come out and say this, it's a pretty big statement. Consumer preferences will probably not revert to what they were previously, according to Bismay Sharma, managing director of the company's UK and Ireland arm. You can actually find a link to this story and all stories that I'm covering today on Habs News. You can find those on rascalhoney.com. It's the latest post. Macro trends that have been gradually gathering steam prior to the pandemic, including subtle no makeup, and going completely barefaced have been amplified to such an extent by COVID that a return to the heavily contoured looks and statement lips, hey, wait a minute, of recent years is unlikely. Very big statement. I would love to hear what you think. I think that a lot of Gen Z is actually driving this trend. You can see them on TikTok. You can look at Alison Beer's makeup line. You can also look at the largest stars on TikTok. Use the TikTok. The largest stars on TikTok actually have a collaboration with Morphe. It's called Morphe 2, and also Glossier's success. I think that this movement has been building for quite a while, but I absolutely do think that the pandemic has amplified this for sure. All right, next up on the news beat, beauty influencer events are making a comeback. So Cheryl Winchover has a story today on Business of Fashion, and she's reporting that brands like Jouer, Dermalogica, Glow Recipe are starting to hold events in LA for influencers. So previously, these events have been highly criticized because they end up being lavish and over the top, and brands like Benefit will take influencers to Fiji or Bali and take them on these crazy trips, many of which the influencers actually charge the brand to attend, like a piece of sponsored content. But instead, since we are no longer traveling, these events are taking place in LA. So not only do you need to have a high engagement rate, you also need to have a negative COVID test to enter. Pretty interesting concept. It does raise some questions for me, especially in terms of the availability of COVID tests. Are there so many in LA that it's readily available for people to just go and get them? Here in Arkansas, in order for me to get tested, I have not been tested yet, but in order to get tested, you have to have symptoms. And then my boyfriend recently was tested, and we went to the doctor. He received the nose swab, and 15 minutes later, he was told that he was negative. But I think that was kind of a limited circumstance, given that he does work. He's considered an essential worker. He works with the public every single day, and I don't think that that sort of priority should be given to influencers attending an event. That being said, I do realize that these sort of things are part of the job of being an influencer. I have an upcoming staycation happening at the end of the month to cover 2 local museums and a hotel. And frankly, like I'm very nervous about that experience, but I also recognize that it is part of my job and it is part of my impact. So I would love to hear what you think about not only influencer events returning to normal, but also the availability of the test and tests being used on influencers for these purposes. Definitely love to hear from you on that. The next story and the big news of the day is Fashion Week. The show is going to go on, but how? So many of you may not know, I covered Fashion Week, specifically New York Fashion Week, for 17 seasons. I was part of the team that executed the first live stream from the tents at Bryant Park, which is where Fashion Week used to be held for a very long time. So this story is very close to my heart and something I have a lot of experience with. I understand a brand's desire and belief that an in-person fashion presentation is necessary. The industry is still they still highly desire the approval of the big boys. And when I say the big boys, I mean Condé Nast publications. Women's Wear Daily is still considered kind of the gatekeeper. If you have news, a brand always wants to break it with Women's Wear Daily, even though in terms of reaching the public or even an audience that is able to amplify their message, they're not always considered the best source, but because of the industry, everyone always goes through them. So I understand why they want to have these presentations. I want to get these editors out. I haven't seen an editor say that they are traveling for any of the other shows, Paris, London, Milan. Not that I think our passports would get us entry to those countries, but Fashion Week is returning to normal on Sunday, or as normal as we can get right now. So the fashion industry actually brings in nearly $900 million per year just during Fashion Week alone. If you think about the global economy that we live in, you're talking people traveling in for the shows domestically, internationally. There's all kinds of things happening behind the scenes in terms of, makeup companies, skincare companies, nail companies. You have the people who make the clothes, style the clothes, tailor the clothes, the shipping of the clothes back and forth, sometimes across the country, across the world. So just that small example contributes a huge amount to New York's economy and the country's. So it's natural, right? Everybody wants to get back to business. However, there are only 70 odd shows on the calendar this year, as opposed to 160 something that were happening in February, right before the New York City went into lockdown, as well as the rest of the country. So Fashion Week proper, as we say, IMG, worked with the state health department to actually pull together a 33-page document with guidelines, recommendations, safety precautions, so that the shows and the in-person presentations could actually take place at half capacity safely. As has been happening, I would say, in the past decade, there are shows that are going to be live streamed. We can all watch them from the safety and security of our homes, but there's still brands, specifically and designers, who are going to hold their shows in person. I don't think that's necessary for a few reasons. First of all, New York is at phase 4 reopening, which means people are starting to move a little more freely. People are going to work. People are still wearing masks, but they are able to somewhat resume business as normal. That means that even if, we'll say, Vogue editor A, right? Vogue editor A goes to the show, sits front row, views the collection. After that show, after Fashion Week, the editor will then go to what's called a re-see. So then they'll go to the showroom. They will actually see the pieces of clothing in a one-on-one appointment, up close and in person. If that is going to continue, then why do we need to get people together, multiple people, several people together in a room to view clothing that you were just going to go see in a one-on-one appointment, which is safer, afterwards? So that's not really anything that I think is necessary, but of course the industry has been slow to change, and I will be tuning into some live streams. As I said, the shows kick off on Sunday, and we will see how this goes. Obviously, everything that's happening in our world is new and different, and none of us have experienced that before. So I just hope that everyone is safe and the fashion industry can continue, because it means a lot to a lot of people, including their livelihoods. So those are all of the trending stories. Actually, it's not. I've got one more. So the official hashtag of Fashion Week, official being it has been embraced by IMG, and it is popularized, essentially, like it is the hashtag to use if you were talking about New York Fashion Week, was actually started by a group of influencers. So Yuli Ziv, who's the founder of Style Coalition and one of the earliest fashion bloggers, she actually posted a little history lesson for all of us interested in fashion. She talks about the origin of hashtag NYFW and how social media coverage during that time was not welcomed by industry leaders, including Fern Malice, and how we actually aggregated our own content prior to Facebook being used for business purposes, prior to Instagram. We aggregated that content, and it actually lives on a website called InsideTheTents.com. We used Flickr, we used information that we were sharing on Twitter, and we're talking about 2009. So obviously the hashtag has taken off and been used in ways that we never would have dreamed at the time, but it is very interesting to look back and see how far the industry's come, how much they have embraced what is happening in the industry. There's actually a quote that Fern Malice made during a video that we were filming at the time. She said, "Every single person in the world has a blog or website or a camera, and everyone has opinions, and not everyone is really trained and qualified to have the professional opinion that matters." Tells you a little bit about the attitude of the industry towards content creators, influencers. This is, of course, before the word influencer ever existed. All right. Hi, Peter. You've got a question. What's the point of having a 4-season fashion calendar now with our online world? Is that concept obsolete now? I would say yes and no. There is an expression that happens, right? You've got the designers, you've got stylists, there's a vision, they want to convey an experience. These shows and presentations cost a lot of money. And oftentimes these brands are trying to outdo one another. They're trying to get the most attention, the most headlines. They want to know that what they're doing, these hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're putting into these shows, is going to get them the attention that they need, that they think they need to sell their collections. So they're just trying to outstunt each other is really the answer. But I will say, one of the Fashion Week seasons that I was there, I remember this so vividly. It was the Thakoon show. I didn't have a ticket. I watched Anna Wintour, of course, walk into the shows, and I watched the show on the monitor. And I remember this skirt on the model, and as she was walking, it shifted. No woman would wear this skirt walking down the street. The skirt was shifting, it was showing things. The fit wasn't right. But when I looked at photos of that skirt after the show, it looked perfect, interesting. Vogue even covered that skirt. And so I think that there are some things That's just a small example, of course, but there are some things that you can only experience and understand in person. Obviously, garment construction, details, hand beading, all those things are important and go into the value proposition of the garment. But that being said, if it is a kind of, see now, buy now collection, if it's for a mass consumer and not, exorbitantly priced couture, for example, then there is a lot of argument to be made that that show doesn't need to take place in person. My shirt, it says my body is not a problem to be solved. It's part of the Rascal Honey merch collection. There's also a version that says your body is not a problem to be solved, and you can find that at rascalhoney.com/shop. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, you can catch all these links, as I mentioned, at rascalhoney.com right now. They're all available for you. And if you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at I'm Sarah Conley. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week, same time, same place. Bye.